On behalf of the underwriters, the sponsors, and the producers, I welcome you to the 1990 Texas Governor's Debates. I'm Henry Cisneros, and I'll be the moderator for tonight's debate. The program is being broadcast live to an audience across our state so that all of the people of Texas may have an opportunity to fairly judge the candidates for the highest office in our state. Tomorrow night, the Republican candidates will appear on the same stage, and we encourage you to tune in and watch that debate also. But for now, let's sit back and watch as the Democratic contenders for governor of Texas face the issues and the voters for the next 90 minutes. So it's on with the show, and first let's introduce the people we're all waiting to see. The candidates. First, please welcome Ann Richards. Next, please welcome Mark White. And finally, please welcome Jim Maddox. Next, let me introduce the panel of journalists for tonight's debate. First, Bruce Davidson from one of my favorite places, San Antonio. Bruce is a reporter for the San Antonio Express News and has covered politics on every level from Washington to Austin. Next, Cindy Kennard from Dallas. She reports for WFAA TV in Dallas and previously was a reporter in Houston. And finally, R.G. Ratcliffe joins us from Austin. R.G. covers politics for the Houston Chronicle's Austin Bureau and has over a decade of political reporting experience. Tonight's debate will be in three sections. The first section consists of questions from the panel of journalists. In this section, each candidate will receive a question and then have 2 minutes to answer it, and a follow-up question of 30 seconds from one of the journalists, and then 30 seconds to answer that. Then each of the other candidates not directly questioned will have 30 seconds in the form of a rebuttal. That's the first section. Section 2 of our debate has each candidate answering a question that has been submitted by one of the other candidates. I'll have the opportunity as moderator to articulate that question, and they will have 2 1/2 minutes to answer. That's section 2. And in the third and final sections, the candidates will present their closing statements. Let's go now to the first section, the journalists asking questions, and we'll begin with Bruce Davidson asking a question of Jim Maddox. Jim, you have 2 minutes to answer the question.
Mr. Maddox, you recently told the Texas Observer that campaign contributions have an impact on public policy. Last year, you were criticized for accepting $40,000 in contributions from a businessman after the settlement of a pollution lawsuit the state filed against him. There have also been insinuations that you have used the power of your office to intimidate people into making contributions. If you were governor, would you push for ethics and campaign finance reform? And how would you assure the voters that your office and appointments were not for sale?
Well, first, let me say that the premise of your question is not accurate in that we've received contributions from a great number of people, of course, but the fact is that we have not had our public policy ever affected by a campaign contribution, and I hope that none of these other candidates have either. Going beyond that, I was one of the original authors that authored the open records, open meeting, full financial disclosure, and the disclosure of campaign contributions when I was in the state legislature. Those acts were compromises, and we could strengthen them. I think they should be strengthened, and I would work hard to try to strengthen those as governor of Texas.
You have time for a follow-up question.
You once campaigned for Congress by advertising the fact that you had made your personal income tax returns public, but you haven't responded to a challenge to release your recent tax returns. Will you pledge to release those returns during this campaign?
Well, I think that the income tax returns are an issue only because a candidate has made them to be an issue. There's one candidate has released income tax returns out of the 13 in the governor's race. But I think that the real issue in this campaign It's not how much I pay in taxes or not how much they pay in taxes. The real issue is how much taxes all the citizens of Texas are going to have to pay if either one of them gets elected to be the governor of Texas.
We have now, under our format, a rebuttal opportunity, and we'll go first to candidate White.
Well, first of all, Jim, I think all three of us are opposed to raising taxes, and the last time I heard we were all for lottery. And I think it's important we make that clear. I do think we do need to have campaign finance reform. I think we need fuller disclosure, and I think the question was brought out very fairly. If anyone has business pending before one of the agencies or any other office holder, they ought to be pointing out that business is pending, and it ought to be part of the report. So that way we can see exactly who is contributing to campaigns and what special interests they might have in those contributions. Full disclosure, I think, is the proper way to go about it, and I think it's something that we ought to see in every candidate and every campaign.
We now have an opportunity for rebuttal from candidate Richards.
The people have a right to know how we earn our income, who we do business with, where the money comes from. I'm really pleased that we have over 16,000 contributors to my campaign, and 80% of them were checks of $50 or less. And I am the candidate that has released my income tax statements for the 7 years that I've been in statewide office, and I think anyone who runs for statewide office ought to do the same thing. I've proposed the strongest ethics reform legislation ever proposed. I think you've got to go further than just the disclosure not only of your personal finances and how you've raised your money, but I think that we have to have good reporting laws on whether you accepted gifts, whether or not you accepted special favors and trips, and I think the lobbyists have to report as well what they did in relation to any elected official.
The second set of questions is initiated by Ms. Kennard, and it will go to candidate White.
Mr. White, the teachers in the state of Texas were credited with helping elect you after you promised them a pay raise. You were elected and you put the teachers to the test, and subsequently they turned against you and voted you out of office. Some teachers are now asking, what are you going to do to them this time, and why should they support you?
Ladies and gentlemen, please, if you would.
I think our teachers have been tested enough, and I think that there was a great deal of fear in the minds of those people who were called upon to take that test. It was a tough thing for them, and many of them thought they were going to lose their jobs because of the test. After I've looked it over, I think I may be the only one that lost a job over the test. What do we do now for teachers? I think is extremely important. First thing we do is to keep the reforms that we've made. Smaller class sizes, the fact that they have duty-free lunch periods, the only and the largest tax increase in modern history, salary increase in modern history for teachers was done during my administration. They were moving forward in comparison with teachers in other states. Now they're moving backwards. I think that's wrong. We've got to change it. I want to listen to our teachers when they tell us what needs to be done to correct the career ladder, to make certain it's going to be fully funded, to make certain we change the appraisal system so that it will work. It's not working now. Need to change it. We will. I think also the teachers are asking for more help in the classroom, and I think that means new technology that will give them the tools that they need to do a first-class job of training our students. The tools that they get today, a blackboard and a piece of chalk. And I think what we need is to give the new technology to those teachers so they can truly use it for the future of our children. When we do this, our teachers, I think, will be given a centerpiece in our society. They will be held up for pride and accolation. That's what they deserve, because they are truly the ones that are performing the most important task today in our society, training our young people. And as governor, I'm going to support them every time. I've made that commitment in the past. I didn't promise perfection, but I promised commitment, and we've done it.
Follow-up question from Cindy Kennard.
I want to get you on the record on this then. Would you support a pay raise and support establishing a teacher pay schedule across the state of Texas?
Well, I certainly believe that our teachers are entitled to more money than they're making today. And I also think that they're entitled to have some form of health care insurance. As governor of Texas, I gave retired teachers the first health care bill that they've ever enjoyed. Retired teachers in Texas now have that because of work we've done. Our current teachers certainly entitled to more salary. I would work to try to find the money for it. I think that with the fact that we've spent $21 billion more dollars since I left office, I think we should have been able to find a pay raise for those teachers in there somewhere.
We have, under this rebuttal format, a minute now of rebuttal for candidate Richards and then a minute for candidate Maddox.
Cindy, I think what's happened with the teachers in the state of Texas is they've not been included in what goes on in the classroom. As someone who taught school, I can tell you that to have plans and programs visited down upon you, that this is the education program that was put together by a, quote, blue ribbon committee that didn't even include teachers or principals. The teachers have had no say in what goes on in their classroom. The teachers are underpaid. Not only do we give them programs with very little salary, but when it doesn't work and when the education system isn't doing well, who do we blame? It's the teachers. It's not the people who put the program together. I'm in favor of health care for teachers, salaries for teachers that is a professional wage, and I am in favor of putting teachers in charge of what goes on in their classroom.
Mr. Maddox?
I think the teachers should have a pay raise, and I think we ought to at least move their salaries up to the national average, and of course it is not now. I think that they need insurance, and I think we should provide actually for insurance for all the school employees. I think that the biggest complaint, though, I hear from teachers is the fact that they simply say, we don't have enough time to teach. We have too much paperwork. All the reforms of House Bill 72 only made us have to work that much harder in compiling our paperwork and not being able to actually teach the children. I think that they should be able to do that, and I would work to try to streamline the process. But I think I would also try to get them back to teaching basics, particularly in the lower grades of school. And I think if we get back to teaching basics, we will see major improvements in our school system. Last year we had 88,000 people drop out of school, and only about twice that much that graduated. So clearly we must make changes throughout the school system.
The third round of questioning, we begin with Mr. Ratcliffe, and the question goes to Ms. Richards.
Ms. Richards, let's pretend for just a moment that you have become governor. A bill arrives on your desk that would forbid doctors to perform abortions on girls age 16 and younger. What would you do and why?
Well, I veto the bill. I believe, of course, that any youngster should consult their parents, and their parents should be involved in any major decision in their life. I also, though, believe that should there be a breakdown in that communication, that we cannot expose our young people or our adults to the kind of back alley butchery that took place when health care, good, clean abortions were not allowed. I cannot arrive at any conclusion but that no legislator, no judge, and no bureaucrat has any business in determining whether a white woman has an abortion or not.
Follow-up question?
Let's assume that you are faced with an almost certain legislative override of that veto. Would you compromise away the rights of a few women and a few girls to preserve the right of abortion for the majority of Texas women?
I think that the important thing to do, RG, in a case like that is to consult with those groups who know the issue best. That's what I've done in the past, working with the League of Women Voters, the Texas Abortion Rights Action League, the Women's Political Caucus, and consult with them on what is the best for the majority of the people in their opinion, because they've been very, very close to the issue for a long time. But I would not like to compromise on that bill because I think compromises are very, very tough.
The first 1-minute rebuttal goes to Mr. Maddox.
RG, I'm not sure I understood exactly what your question was, but I think that very clearly that when a person is younger than 16 years of age, and particularly when they go down to 13 and 14, I think the parents ought to be involved in that process. I think as a practical matter right now, doctors do not perform abortions for children without parental consent and without parental knowledge. And I think that doctors are very careful about doing that simply to avoid malpractice issues. So I do not know, and I think evidence would have to be presented to me to show that there is really a problem that's existing there. You see, there are many young people that simply cannot converse with their parents either. As a matter of fact, as a prosecutor, I've actually put people in the penitentiary for committing incest with their children. And for that reason, I'm reluctant to say straight across the board that you must have parental consent on any issue.
Rebuttal, Mr. White.
I think that Thomas Jefferson said it best, that the government that governs least governs best. And I think that it is very important that we let the woman make that decision. I think that woman has to make that decision with all of the best advice and counsel, discussions with her loved ones, her parents, or whoever it might be, with her pastor and with her God. And I think that's the better choice, and I think the woman is the one to make that choice.
Each of the three journalists has had an opportunity to ask a question of each of the three candidates. We're going to go through this cycle another 2 times so that by the time we're finished, each journalist will have asked a question of all of the three candidates. And so in the second round, we go to Cindy Kennard first, and she begins with Mr. Maddox.
Mr. Maddox, the cornerstone of your campaign has been to endorse a state lottery. You imply it'll alleviate the need for taxes. You even have a campaign commercial that suggests to the voter that the lottery is likely the fix-all. Your best estimate is the lottery will raise $600 million a year, but educational equity alone will cost $3.2 billion a year. Where will you get the money to make up the difference?
First, I think there are a number of assumptions that you made in your question that are not accurate. I don't think educational equity will cost $3.2 billion. As a matter of fact, most estimates believe that the first-year expenditure would come in somewhere between $600 million and $1 billion. I think a state lottery will bring in approximately $700 million during the first full fiscal year of operation of that lottery. That's based on the experience we've seen in Florida. And I think that the other ways that we will get the additional money that's necessary for education will come through using the lottery money to get matching funds from the federal government, by streamlining our state government and really doing a reorganizational process that needs to be done, hasn't ever been done. And I think also that we will get it from the normal growth in state revenues, and we would project that we will have some $3 to $5 billion additional state revenues during the next biennium, and that's where the money would come from to put together the whole fix that needs to be there. But there are also some other things that will take place in this process very clearly. We don't want to just throw money away again. We did some of that the last time with very little results. Since we passed House Bill 72, we've had an additional 500,000 young people drop out of school. About 40% of the young people in this particular metropolitan area that we're in, for instance, will not pass the basic skills test the first time they take it. So we've got to make sure that changes take place, not just throw money at the system. And I fear that what's happening in the legislature right now is that they're simply going to try to figure out a way to put some more into it without changing it, and that's a mistake. We need to come to the bargaining table and make sure that we do those kind of things that Governor White was talking about a moment ago, and some of the things that he and the legislature should have done the first time that the legislation was up for House Bill 72.
Follow-up question?
Since you're so confident, then, would you pledge right now that you absolutely will not raise taxes? And I'd like to hear from the other candidates on that also.
I will not raise taxes.
Rebuttal opportunity to Mr. White.
First of all, there's no need for any new taxes at this time in Texas, and I can assure you with the present increase in revenues that we can meet the needs of our educational system with those increased revenues. And let me say, Jim, there were students dropping out before House Bill 72. Maybe you didn't realize that, but the fact of the matter is they're dropping out today at a lower rate. The young people in Texas across the board are performing at higher achievement levels than they ever have before. And that just started after House Bill 72, not before. And let me assure you that we spent the money, I think, wisely. We spent it on teachers' salaries. That's exactly what we spent it on, and I'm proud of it. We also spent it to make certain that they were going to have smaller class sizes, and I'm proud of that as well. And I think the teachers in Texas know who's been committed to educational reform and improvement. And that tax plan that you were talking about with those Lotteries sounds a lot more like that secret plan I heard about here about 4 years ago.
The rebuttal, 1 minute extended now to Ms. Richards.
Well, I'm for a lottery. How about you, Mark?
I've been for it.
Okay, now I think that makes 3 of us here that are for a lottery. And I've been real discouraged, Jim, that you continue to run television ads saying that Mark White and I are not for a lottery and you are, and I think that's a lie, and I think you need to pull it down from television. Now, the problem with a lottery is it takes a while to start up. This is a great big state, and it is an unstable source of revenue. You know, some years if the game catches on and it's hot, well, you'll make a lot of money. And some years when the pots don't build up and the games aren't so good, it doesn't. I do not want any school teacher or any child in this state to be told, we can only give you half an education this year, we can only pay you half a salary because the lottery didn't do too well. I'm in favor of passing a lottery, and I do not believe we need to raise taxes.
The next round of questioning goes to Mr. Ratcliffe, and he begins with candidate White.
Mr. White, when the Texas Supreme Court declared the state system of school finance unconstitutional last year, it acted against a system for which you had raised taxes in the name of educational excellence. Why did your education reforms fail to adequately address the needs of poor school districts, and how can parents in impoverished school districts feel certain you would meet their needs now?
Well, let me say that the monies that we put into education, equalization aid, was the largest increase in equalization aid in the history of Texas. It wasn't enough. We needed to do more. But we did as much as we could at the time, and that was more than anyone else had ever done. And I think it's a shame that we had to wait now for these years and not do anything more. Since I left, it hadn't improved. It's gotten worse. What I'm committed to do is to see that we continue to see improvements. And I was down in Hidalgo County this past week at the Ed Couch Elsa School District and went in and watched those young teachers teaching those young children of ours how to read and to write and to count. Oh, they're doing a wonderful job. I want to tell you the enthusiasm in the classroom is inspiring to see the excitement there. But they need new tools to help do that job. And that new tool that I'm talking about is the technology that's there to help build better programs, more exciting programs for our young people. It's a new textbook that's available in a sense, and we need to give it to the kids. Our teachers are asking for that, and I think when they get it, they'll do an even better job of teaching our kids. We're going to have the best trained, best educated young people in Texas history, and I want Texas to lead the way in the future for the rest of the country. If we keep the commitment that we made in '72 and keep the commitment that I made when I ran as governor before, and I'll make again to you tonight, that we're going to have the best educational system in the country with the best products coming out because we have good teachers doing a good job.
Follow-up question?
You also put emphasis on student results and standardized tests as a measure of educational excellence. But isn't there a risk here that teachers are teaching for the test and not teaching for long-term knowledge and reasoning abilities?
Well, you know, the test has been criticized for doing just that, and I'm a little curious about what they want to teach, because the test is on reading, writing, and counting. That's what I want them to learn. That's important. And I think that we see the achievement levels going up for those young people today, and they're staying in school because those achievement levels are going up. I want them to learn more than just that. I want them to have the excitement in the classroom, the energy and the experience of those teachers to do as they choose and to make decisions in the classroom and not be tied down to a curriculum that is, in a sense, antiquated and too structured. But let's make certain they do that after we meet these minimum standards, and then let our teachers have the independence to do as they choose in that classroom to inspire the young people to do even better. That's what I think we need to do in Texas, and I'm committed to seeing it done.
The first rebuttal goes to Ms. Richards. 1 minute.
All across the state of Texas, this very week, teachers have abandoned their school plans. They have set aside everything that has gone on in that classroom for building kids' understanding and education because it's Teams test time. There's not a teacher out there that doesn't know that they have got to teach the test, not the material. Teachers are impatient, unhappy, and I don't blame them. If you would allow those teachers, though, to set up the system whereby those students can perform, then I would suggest that that most basic relationship between a teacher and a student that is so fundamental to good education, then it can be allowed to flourish. I've proposed a Texas School Assembly to be made up of teachers and principals and students and parents and business leaders to determine how the education product can be best delivered.
Mr. Maddox?
I think one of the fundamental problems about education today, and it's one that we must look at, is that after the passage of House Bill 72, we increased by 50% the expenditures on public education from the state government, and we went up by 50% on the local property taxes. The fact is that performance in the schools simply has not measured up to the kind of monies that we put in there. We're now spending $13 billion a year, and I think you have to have tests. I think that you have to have strict discipline. I think you must work in continuing that process. I would like to use just a moment this time also to say something about the lottery. You see, and the week before I announced, you said in your heart of hearts you could not support the lottery. Mark, you said that you couldn't support it back in '84 and you opted for new taxes. And matter of fact, you even vetoed a piece of legislation that chased one of our manufacturers out of the state of Texas where he could not continue to manufacture the lottery equipment. What's happened is you feel the political winds blowing in your faces and momentum going the opposite direction, and you decide you're going to try to get on to it now.
All right, we'll go to the next round of questions. The next question is from Bruce Davidson, and it's to candidate Richards.
Ms. Richards, if you were the governor and the state were in a tight budget situation, would you be willing to transfer funds from higher education to help finance public education?
Guess what we're going to talk about? We're going to talk about the lottery so we can finish this sucker. All right? I said,
read my lips.
I was offered the opportunity a couple of years ago to run a lottery, and I told them that I thought an independent agency ought to do that, a commission that I'm sure would move with all the speed that the Horse Racing Commission has moved with, and that in my heart of hearts I really didn't want to run a lottery because there are a lot of things that can affect an elected official. I mean, the slightest little wrinkle, somebody involved that does some wrongdoing, all of a sudden, boom, and the whole thing is gone and nobody's buying tickets. So I want to make it real clear here tonight, and then maybe we will have dispensed with this mess about the lottery, that I'm in favor of the lottery. Mark said he's in favor of the lottery, and I think that's all there is to it. Now, what did you ask me?
The real important question.
I'm kidding you. No, I would not be willing to take money from higher education. One of the things that's happened in government in the past, and we have seen a lot of elected leaders do it, is that they want to be the education president or the environmental governor, and they think that government is divided up into these little segments and that none of them affect the other. Well, of course, they're all intertwined. They all have a tension with each other, and nothing could be worse than to take money from higher education where our young people in public school aspire to go and justify it on the grounds that we're going to give it to the public schools. We've got to do the job in both places.
Bruce, you have a follow-up question.
One candidate for governor has proposed giving 2 years of college tuition, fees, and books to any Texas high school student with a B average and a good attendance record and whose family does not make more than $30,000 a year. Would you support such a proposal?
Well, I think it's a great idea, and it is a perfect example of what we have seen time after time, in fact, from the governor we got in there now. one of those guys that buys a lot of TV, you know, and the sky is the limit because they haven't ever been there. You know, they've never had to serve in government, don't have the slightest idea what the structure of it is, know nothing about the financing of it. All of a sudden money is just going to come from out of the blue. Everybody's going to be educated, everybody's going to be locked up. And I think that the public's going to see through that. At least I hope to heaven they are.
All right, we go to the first rebuttal from Jim Maddox.
Can we go back to the lottery again? The one thing I would say, Ann, let me tell you, I wouldn't ever want you to make a commitment to me that you made on television when you said, in my heart of hearts, I cannot support this particular issue. And Mark, we know how you keep your word, so we don't want to get into that anymore. So the fact is, look, we need to improve education. We need to find a way to pay for it. If these folks are saying that they don't want to, that they're going to have a lottery, and if they're going to get out there and push it, and I don't mean just be for it, because you see, you're not going to get a lottery passed in Texas if you just for it and say, I'm for it, I'll sign the bill. The only way you're going to get it passed is if you are a real advocate for it and you work hard for it. And I'm glad that I brought this thing to the forefront, and I hope that these folks will get out and start campaigning for it. Because if you do, maybe we can get something passed and we can save the taxpayers about what would have been about $3.5 billion that we could have had, Mark, had you put this lottery in when we first started out.
Mr. White?
The answer to the question was that we shouldn't transfer higher education funds to public schools. And Jim, if I have to repeat any of this to you again so you can understand it, I will. But let me assure you that what we need to be doing is putting a stronger resource together in higher education for research to make certain that those schools of higher education can be literally magnets for economic growth for Texas and create new jobs like we saw with MCC coming to Austin and 3M coming to Texas, and making certain that they really germinate new industries for our state, creating new jobs, new economic prosperity for Texas. That's the way we leverage those investments for the benefit of our people, and that's what I intend to do as governor.
We've been through 2 rounds of the journalist questions, and we're now going into the final 3 questions, and each will direct a question to the candidate who they didn't direct it to before. So we begin with Mr. Ratcliffe, and he directs his question to Mr. Maddox.
I'm a little afraid to even ask this. Many candidates speak about getting to the root of crime through improved education and a crackdown on drugs. But in the short run, increased prison space is a likely need. How much more prison space would you build? And considering you've committed all your lottery money to public education, how would you pay for it?
RG, right now we are building approximately 20,000 new beds to have a total capacity of about 60,000 beds. And I think that if we don't change the entire format of the criminal justice system, and I've been calling for reform of it since 1985, that we are going to see the kind of problems continue, and we'll have to build another 20,000 beds. And I think if we're going to build those beds, rather than demanding more money of the public, I think we need to find that money from within our overall state budget. And I think we can do that. There's money there and available if we will simply reorder our priorities. I think that the thing that must happen, though, is that we must go back and cause changes in the criminal justice system. I testified for the legislature this last time, and they adopted some of the recommendations that I made, such as the reorganizing of several of the different agencies. But they didn't take any of the hard steps, the real hard steps of going in and making fundamental change, such as requiring drug and alcohol abuse treatment within the criminal justice system, requiring real testing of people that abuse drugs and alcohol. And we can go into the system and make changes, particularly when there are about 80% of the people that are in the Department of Corrections have drug and alcohol problems. We have to make a decision whether or not we're going to treat those people or whether we're going to continue to circle them through the system. I think that we must treat them in some way. And as far as we were talking about this other candidate on television and everything about busting rocks, Well, we've been doing something similar to that in East Texas for a long time. They've been cutting trees and clearing ground and chopping weeds and hoeing cotton. Well, there's not much demand in our society either for busting rocks or chopping weeds or hoeing cotton. It's just not. And what we've got to do is go in and teach these young people how to be educated, and we must educate them, and also how to resist the temptations of drugs and alcohol if we're ever going to solve our overall problem.
Follow up?
Talking about drugs and alcohol, one of the big problems with drug abuse today is that the number of babies who are born addicted to drugs. Would you prosecute the mothers of these babies, and would you make them liable for the cost of the baby's treatment and rehabilitation?
Well, RG, I don't think I have an answer for that, just to be honest with you. I think very clearly that a woman that is abusing drugs while she is pregnant, or is abusing alcohol while she's pregnant, has such a fundamental problem that individual must be treated herself. And I think that must happen. And I think that that individual may not have the monies to provide for the drug or alcohol treatment for the child, to rehabilitate that child. Unfortunately, drug and alcohol abuse permeate all aspects of our society. And I think if we're ever going to solve the problem, we're not going to solve it by doing what is the premise of your question. I think we must work on it on the other end. We must teach every young person, every year, in every grade, in every school, about the dangers of drug and alcohol abuse. And if we do that, in the long run, I think we can solve many of the problems that we're now facing. We must intercede into their lives, and then some way or another, we must give them the kind of drug treatments that they need. At the same time, we must make sure that the people that are supplying those drugs will be prosecuted also, and I assure you that they will be under my administration.
Rebuttal response from candidate White.
Certainly we need strong educational programs to reduce the level of use of drugs and abuse of drugs. But when you look at the criminal problem we face in Texas with an overflowing prison, now holding 40,000 prisoners, not holding them very long, we have 15,000 guards. The real problem we face today in law enforcement is we do not have enough police officers on the street, in our neighborhoods, in the community, where they can do some good in protecting the law-abiding citizens of Texas. Until we start doing that, we're going to have to put up with this criminal element that is outstripping every bit of our budget resources. What I suggest we do is to put police officers back in those neighborhoods, and the state of Texas needs to help do that. I saw where a young child was burned to death in a home here the other day in Houston because of the burglar bars on their house. Couldn't get out. It's a shame when law-abiding citizens have to lock themselves up in a cell at night. And that's what we're doing all across Texas, because we're not doing government's first function, protecting the lives and property of our people. It'll save us money, it'll save us the lives of lots of people if we'll go forward with putting police officers in the neighborhood doing their job and doing it better, because they're there with our help and our support.
Ms. Richards.
RG, the state of Texas, the major cities, we have half of the law enforcement officers as the national average. It is obvious that you're not going to stop crime when you've got an inadequate police force. But the thing that drives the police force, the sheriffs, law enforcement people of this state crazy is that they know when they catch them, they don't have any place to put them. Because the penitentiaries are full, they're backed up into the county jails, and we made a step forward in the last session of the legislature to allow the counties to build alternative programs, productive programs, much like Jim talked about, but also boot camps. We've been fighting this war on drugs with only a law enforcement front. We have to fight on two other fronts. We have to fight it on the front of education, and we must fight it on the front of treatment. Until you stop the demand for drugs, you are not going to stop the supply of drugs. And it has to be done in the penitentiaries, where 80% of the prisoners are there as a result of alcohol or drugs. I would believe that you shouldn't let anybody out of the penitentiary until they have satisfied an education course, a drug rehab course, and can show that they can make a living on the outside.
Bruce Davidson. Bruce Davidson with a question to candidate White.
Mr. White, recent federal court rulings have pushed the debate over the system for selecting our judges to the forefront, and it appears that finding a permanent solution may be delayed until after the 1990 elections. What type of judicial system would you advocate?
I think our judicial system in Texas, whereby we elect judges, is important that we keep that process. I'm for elected judges. And throughout most of Texas, the rural parts of Texas, the people in those areas know the judges that they elect. They know them, they see them, they work with them, live near them, and know who's doing a good job and who isn't, and they can make the right decisions on who to keep in that office and who to let out of that office. What we've seen happen in the major urban areas, though, is that we've grown so fast, and in ways our judiciary has grown more distant from the people. And today most recently, we had people going in to vote and coming out and saying we had 6 people running for county court at law number 23. Who should I vote for? We don't know those people too often, and I think what we've got to do is to bring it back closer to the people, and we do that by breaking these districts into smaller portions where candidates for the office, including the candidate for judge, can get to know the people in that community and talk with them, and they can work together, and they'll be responsive to each other. And I think we can improve the system dramatically by doing that. Single-member districts, I think, would be probably too small, and I don't know that it would serve the purpose for getting back into those districts and getting to know the people well. But we must reduce the size of the districts where we can see some communication between the courts, the judges that are serving in those courts, and the people. And I will support a plan to do just that.
Follow up, Bruce?
Would you prefer that these elections be partisan or nonpartisan?
Well, I always liked partisan elections, frankly. I think it's important that we get out there and talk about the differences between candidates. In the area of justice, though, there shouldn't be any such thing as Republican justice or Democratic justice. We ought to be finding the person who can be the lawyer, who will serve as the judge in a fair and impartial way. I happen to support the Democratic Party and the ticket. I don't think that's the problem that we face today. The question of it being a Democrat or Republican is something the people can decide on. The important thing is they know who they're voting for. And by breaking these districts down to smaller sizes, they will be able to determine who they're voting for, and I think make a sound decision. So I don't think it's necessary to change that.
Ms. Richards, some thoughts on this in 1 minute?
I'm in favor of single-member districts. I think that the government closest to the people is the best government. We hear an awful lot about the inability of people to distinguish between a lot of judges on the ballot. This gives them an opportunity to have someone that is very close and in their neighborhood. And you know, I have a whole lot of faith, maybe it's corny, in our founding fathers' judgment that the way that we set up the dialogue between candidates is between political parties. And just as a matter of management, we have hard enough time now getting people to go to the polls. Are you going to set up a whole separate voting time for them to go in some nonpartisan election for judges? I would rather the judges to be chosen at the time that the most people are going to the polls, and so I'd support partisan election.
Mr. Maddox?
As I'm sure you're aware, I have been for the last 7 years the crisis manager for the state of Texas. I've had to handle through lawsuits such issues as how we finance our public schools. Another one, of course, happens to be the way we select our judges. I think that we should elect our judges from much smaller districts approximately the same size that our state representatives run in. I think we should make sure, though, that the cases that they have a county-wide jurisdiction, even if we do elect them from smaller districts. I think that what we ought to do is change our county courts into district courts and have only one trial level group of courts. And then I think that what we probably should do is have the judges perhaps have more than one judge running from the same district, but they would run in alternate years, either 2 years or 4 years or even 6-year alternate terms. And I think by doing that we could see dramatic changes in the ability of our citizens to know their judges and to be able to pick the right judge. I actually believe that process should also go up through our courts of appeals also, because they are under court challenge, and if we don't go on and straighten it all out at one time, I think that it will continue to be a major problem. And I think this legislature is not likely to be able to do it, and it will probably have to be done after the next census.
We go now to the final question in this round of the journalists, and we close with Cindy Kennard, and she begins with candidate Richards.
Ms. Richards, after the 1988 presidential elections, the character issues have become important to the voters. You have talked about setting a new tone for ethics and accountability. Because you are a recovering alcoholic, which you have acknowledged publicly, do you have any doubt in your own mind about your abilities to perform as governor, which is of course not the most stress-free job that there is? And furthermore, because crime and drugs are considered a big issue in this state, can you assure the voters that you haven't abused any illegal drugs? And what sort of role model would you be on this issue?
I think, Cindy, that crises in our lives make us stronger people. I don't recommend that anyone go through what I went through to become stronger. But I can tell you that as a result of the experience of being hospitalized 10 years ago this year, I'm closer to my family, closer to my children. I have a lot better sense of what is important in life. I no longer have to feel that I cannot face the difficulties of life. I think, if anything, my experience as an alcoholic and my recovery has made me better to lead this state. I think it is particularly significant when we know that addiction is the #1 difficult and front page news all over the country. I've seen those young people. I've seen them in 12-step programs that I participate in. And I know that unless there are those of us who have been through this experience, who talk about it publicly, who acknowledge that we have had a disease and that there is hope and that there is recovery from that disease, then we are going to continue to see the cycle of use continue. It just so happens that my addiction was alcohol. Do not, though, in any way say that any addiction is better or worse, whether it be food or whether it be heroin or whether the illegality of it still makes it a disease. And for those of us who are genetically predisposed to those diseases, we really have to know about it, and we have to teach our kids about it, or it ain't never going to stop.
Cindy, you have a follow-up question?
Yes, I don't know the answer to the second part of my question was, can you assure the voters, and I'd like to hear from everybody on this if I could in fairness, can you assure the voters that you haven't abused any illegal drugs?
I can assure the voters that my addiction was alcohol. But I do not want to in any way slight any of those people out there who have abused other drugs. Addiction is addiction is addiction. And unless we break the cycle of that addiction, we are never going to solve the problem.
Mr. Maddox?
Given the fact that Governor Clements suffered a heart attack while being in office, and I think the health of the candidates is an important issue, and I think that the health of all of our citizens is a very important issue, and I think we ought to encourage everyone to try to abstain from abusing alcohol or abusing drugs in any way. And I think it's very clear also that we need to provide role models to try to provide better health care for everybody in our society, and I will try to do that. And Cindy, to answer your question, I don't use alcohol, and I have never abused any kinds of dangerous drugs, no cocaine, heroin, marijuana, or anything else. And I think that we ought to encourage everyone not to ever even try it or test it in any way.
Mr. White?
I worry about drug addiction because I have 3 young children. And too often I think parents are the last to know when their child may be abusing drugs or alcohol. Too often they find that child entrapped in laws that would give criminal punishment. You see lives lost. And I think it's important that as parents that we try to do our best to learn about what our children are doing so that we can try to help them avoid this. In response to your question about the use of drugs, I've never used any drug that we're talking about here tonight. That's something that was foreign to me. I brought up in a family that simply we didn't do those things. And that was the leadership of a mother and a dad. And I think when we see our families breaking down, that's what we need to restore. That's where we come to the root of this problem. It comes to the root of the problem with parents who are loving and caring and are willing to work to see that their children are going to be given all the right opportunities to make those right choices. That's what I've tried to do, and so far I think it's working okay. I've got 2 of them here today. How are we doing, guys?
We come to the end of this section, which deals with the journalist questions. I think you'll agree that the producers picked 3 excellent journalists who prepared and asked good questions. We're fortunate that they're going to be back tomorrow evening for the same round of approach to the Republican candidates in the debate tomorrow evening. Why don't we say thank you with our applause to these 3 distinguished journalists. Thank you. Now it's time for the second part of tonight's debate, and each of the candidates submitted a series of questions which were then randomly selected. And the way this was set up, each of the candidates submitted a question directed toward another candidate. They are tough questions. I will read them as the moderator. Now, in a very unusual development tonight, we are ahead of schedule by quite a lot. So, as the moderator, what I am going to do is to give the candidates the time that they were scheduled to answer the question, but they were to be without rebuttal under the original concept. What I'd like to do, if it meets with the approval of those up here, is to give you 30 seconds, the other 2 to whom the question is not directed, to comment on it. And I think that might be a livelier exchange, but we'll have to watch it real carefully on time. The first question is from Jim Maddox to Mark White. During your 1982 campaign for governor, you promised you wouldn't raise taxes. You went on to raise sales taxes, gasoline taxes, motor vehicle taxes, hunting and fishing license fees, and parks and recreation fees. How can the voters expect you to stick to your no new taxes pledge this time around? 2.5 minutes.
You don't think I'd ever do that again, do you, Jim? No, the difference is simply this. The difference is simply this. When I took office, the price of oil was $30 a barrel, and it was supposed to go up. And before I left office, the price of oil went down below $9 a barrel. We had a very tough choice to make for the future of our state, and that's the reason I'm running for governor tonight. That choice was simply one of, will we go forward with schools and roads, and will we have a future in Texas, or are we going to sit back and run from the fight? Are we going to say that no, Texans don't have the courage to go forward? I didn't believe in that. I don't believe in retreat. We were making progress, and I didn't want to see it return to the old days in which our children were doing poorly by any standard, and trade that in on some expediency or some lack of courage to do what was right. I think it's important for leaders in this state and this nation, without fear of the consequences, to take those decisions that are there and move forward for a state, and that's what I did. Our schools are better today because of that. What if we had taken the course that you would suggest and we had retreated? Where would we be today? Teacher salaries would be at the bottom of the pile. Student achievement would be going down as it was when I took office. That's not what I want for Texas, and I don't think that's what the people of Texas want either. I think they want a leader that's willing to go forward and has the courage to do what's right in the toughest of circumstances, and that's what I did, and that's what I intend to do again.
And, all right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going apart from the script here, so I'm going to have to ask your cooperation as we move along. And comments or thoughts in this discussion here, and then Jim, I'll go to you for 30 seconds.
Well, I'm sort of interested, really, in Jim proposing that question to Mark, because I've been listening to these guys, and, you know, they've been running stuff for a long time. And we know Mark raised taxes, and the question is, you know, whether we would have all done the same thing. Well, Jim doesn't know, and I really don't know either, because we weren't in that seat when he had to make that decision. I think all of us feel, though, that Texas is on the way up. I think that all of us can feel that recovery is coming. We have seen in the Treasury, by our estimates, that we're going to have a minimum of $3 billion in additional revenue in the next biennium. Now, Jim's told us, though, that he's against an income tax, and I'm told that House Bill 660, or I think that was the number, Jim, was an income tax that you sponsored when you were in the Texas House. And I think that when we talk about whether or not we are going to raise taxes or not, we have to be on the record for where our stand has been. I don't believe that in this next biennium it is going to be necessary to raise additional taxation from the taxpayers. But what's really important that I want to get in tonight is that I'm going to be against this business of passing it on to the local property owners when the legislature has a good idea.